Most people think grief brings families closer. But 3 days after we buried our parents, my sister Marianne handed me an eviction notice in the kitchen where we learned to bake bread. She thought she had secured her legacy by locking me out, treating me like a liability she needed to manage. She didn't realize that I was the one who kept the receipts, or that 5 years is a long time to wait for a reckoning. The rain in Hollow Creek always felt heavier than anywhere else in Pennsylvania. It was a dense, gray sheet that turned the ground into an unending slush of mud and dead leaves. I stood by the gravesite, my heels sinking into the softened earth. Watching the casket descend, my mother and father were gone, taken by a highway accident that felt too sudden to be real, leaving a silence in my life that was deafening. But even louder than the silence was my sister. Marianne stood to my left, holding a black umbrella that seemed large enough to shelter a small village. Yet she held it strictly over herself and the priest. I felt the cold dampness seeping through the shoulders of my coat. At 36, 4 years my senior, Marianne had always been the manager of the Patterson family. She was the one who remembered birthdays, organized holiday dinners, and, as I was rapidly learning, the one who decided how we would grieve. As the service ended and the mourners began to drift toward their cars, I reached out to shake the hand of Mr. Henderson, our neighbor of 20 years. Before our fingers could touch, Marianne intercepted him. She placed a hand on his forearm, her smile tight and practiced. "Thank you so much for coming," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "It means so much to us. Anna is barely holding it together, as you can imagine. We are trying to keep things brief for her sake." I stood there, perfectly composed, my hands clasped in front of me. I was not barely holding it together. I was numb, certainly, and deeply sad. But I was steady. I had been the one to identify the bodies because Marianne had claimed she could not bear the sight. I had been the one to choose the flowers because Marianne said the choices were too overwhelming. Yet here she was, rewriting the narrative in real time, painting me as the fragile little sister who needed to be shielded from the neighborhood. "We should go," Marianne said, turning to me with a look that was less like comfort and more like a command. "The reception is starting at the house. I need to make sure the caterers set up the ham correctly." I nodded, feeling a strange friction in my chest. It was a sensation I would become intimately familiar with over the next few days, the chafing of my reality against her version of it. When we arrived at the house, the sprawling 2-story Victorian on Elm Street that our parents had spent 30 years restoring, the atmosphere shifted. It did not feel like a home in mourning. It felt like a staging area. Marianne moved through the rooms with the efficiency of a job site foreman. She directed the flow of guests, pointed out where coats should go, and notably, controlled the keys. I watched her unhook the master ring from the hook by the back door and slip it into her purse. "I need to make sure no one wanders into the private spaces," she told me when she caught me staring. "People can be so nosy during tragedies. Anna, you know that. I did not know that. Our neighbors were kind people, but I let it go. I was tired. I wanted to retreat to my childhood bedroom, the one sanctuary I had left, and just sit with the smell of the old oak floorboards and the lavender sachets my mother used to hide in the drawers. I walked up the stairs, the noise of the wake fading into a dull hum below. I turned the knob to my room and pushed the door open. I stopped dead in the doorway. My room was unrecognizable. The quilt my grandmother had stitched was gone. Stripped from the bed, the bookshelf, usually overflowing with my old paperbacks and yearbooks, was empty. In the center of the room, cardboard boxes were stacked 3 high, taped shut, and labeled in thick black marker. Charity, trash, storage. My chest tightened. I walked over to a box labeled storage and saw my high school diploma peeking out from under a stack of old magazines. "What are you doing?" I spun around. Marianne was standing in the doorway, a tray of deviled eggs in her hands. She did not look guilty. She looked annoyed that I had interrupted her workflow. "I am clearing out the clutter," she said, stepping into the room and setting the tray on the bare mattress. "Mom and Dad would not want us to wallow." Anna. They would want us to be efficient. I started a few days ago. I knew you would not be up to the task. A few days ago? The funeral was today. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. My grief, which had been a heavy, shapeless fog, suddenly sharpened into something hard. You packed up my room? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it level. This is not clutter. Marianne, these are my things. I am staying here. Marianne sighed, the sound of a parent losing patience with a toddler. For now. Anna. For now. But we have to be realistic. The house is huge. It takes a fortune to heat. I am just trying to get a head start on the organization. You know how you get when things are messy. You shut down. I am doing this for you. She walked over and patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. Come downstairs. People are asking for you. And please, fix your face. You look hysterical. I stood in the center of my half-emptied room for a long time after she left. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the speed of it. The boxes were taped with precision. This wasn't a frantic reaction to death. This was a plan. The next day, the house was quiet. The guests were gone. The ham was put away. It was just the two of us in the kitchen. The air thick with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken tension. Marianne sat at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of her. She had her reading glasses on, the ones she wore when she wanted to look official. We need to talk about the estate, she said, not looking up from the documents. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I assumed we would be calling the family attorney, Mr. Reed Halberg. He had handled our parents' affairs for as long as I could remember. Should I call Reed? I asked. Marianne waved her hand dismissively. No need. I have spoken to him. It is all standard. Informal wishes, mostly. Informal wishes? Mom and Dad wanted to keep things simple, she said, finally meeting my eyes. They knew probate eats up half the inheritance in fees. They wanted the house kept intact. They were very clear about that. They did not want it sold off or chopped up. I frowned. That sounded like them. Certainly. They loved this house, but the way she said it, kept intact, felt heavy. Okay, I said slowly. So we keep the house. We can figure out the mortgage and the taxes. I have some savings, and my job at the library is stable. Marianne offered a small, pitying smile. Anna, honey, you barely make enough to cover your car payments. That was not true. I was responsible. I paid my bills. I had a credit score of 750, but in this kitchen, under Marianne's gaze, I felt 16 again, asking for gas money. I can contribute. I insisted. It is not just about money, she said, leaning forward. It is about capacity. Mom and Dad were worried about you. Anna. They knew you struggle with pressure. They didn't want you burdened with the upkeep of a property like this. I felt the trap snapping shut. This was the family lore, the story they had told about me since I was a teenager because I was quiet, because I liked to read rather than shout, because I didn't need to dominate every room I walked into. They called it anxiety. They called it fragility. Marianne was weaponizing it. So what are you saying? I asked. I am saying that I'm going to handle the house. I am going to take on the burden. You do not have to worry about anything. I have some simple forms here for you to sign, just acknowledging that I am the executor and that you waive any contest to the immediate transfer. It speeds things up. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was dense with legal jargon. I want to read it, I said. Marianne rolled her eyes. It is standard. Anna, do not make this difficult. Everyone is exhausted. Do you really want to drag this out? Do you want to be the reason we can't settle Mom and Dad's affairs peacefully? I looked at the paper. I looked at my sister. I felt a warning bell ringing in the back of my mind, loud and clear. I want to read it, I repeated, and I think we should talk to Reed together. Marianne snatched the paper back. The mask slipped. Just for a second. Her eyes went hard. Fine. Be difficult. See where that gets you. 2 days later, the pretense of efficiency evaporated. I came downstairs to find Marianne sitting in the living room. She was not alone. A man I did not recognize was standing by the fireplace, holding a clipboard. He wore a polo shirt with a logo embroidered on the chest. Briargate Residential. Anna, Marianne said, her voice devoid of the fake warmth she had used at the funeral. This is Mr. Evans. He is helping me manage the property. Property. Not home. Property. Mr. Evans nodded at me. Avoiding eye contact, I looked at Marianne. What is going on? She stood up and walked over to me, handing me a stiff, cream-colored envelope. This is an occupancy agreement, she said. I opened it. My hands were shaking. It was a typed document, formally drafted. It stated that Anna Patterson was granted a temporary license to occupy the premises at 412 Elm Street for a period of 7 days, expiring on the 24th of the month. 7 days? I looked up, unable to comprehend what I was reading. Marianne, what is this? It is legal notice. She said calmly, You are not on the deed. Anna, you never were. Mom and Dad transferred the title to me 6 months ago. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. When they died, it became mine. 100% mine. The room seemed to tilt. Transferred? 6 months ago? That's not possible. I stammered. Why would they do that? To protect the asset, she said smoothly. And to protect you. We all knew you couldn't handle the responsibility. I am doing you a favor. I am giving you a week to get your things together. After that, Briargate will be taking over the management of the building. Management? You're kicking me out? I am asking you to leave my house, she corrected. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the shock. I had nowhere to go. My apartment lease in the city had ended the month before, and I had moved back to help care for Dad when he got sick. I had given up my space for them, for this family. Marianne, please, I said, the dignity draining out of me. I don't have anywhere to go. I can pay rent. I will sign a lease. I will sleep in the basement. Just let me stay until I can find a place. Please. I reached out to touch her arm, to make a connection. Sister to sister. She took a step back, her face twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. Stop it. Anna, this is exactly why they did it. Look at you, begging. I will pay you. I cried. I will handle the utilities. I will do all the yard work. Marianne shook her head. It is already done. The agreement is generous. You have a week. She turned to walk away, but stopped at the archway to the dining room. She looked back at me, and her eyes were empty of anything resembling love. You always needed someone else to carry you. She said, I am done carrying. The next 48 hours were a blur of nausea and disbelief. I tried to call Reed, the lawyer, but his secretary told me he was out of the country for 2 weeks. I tried to talk to our aunt in Florida, but she just cried and said she didn't want to get involved in sisters' quarrels. Then came the knock at the door. It was a deputy from the sheriff's office. He looked apologetic, shifting his weight from one foot to the other on the porch. Anna Patterson? He asked. Yes. I have some papers for you. He handed me a thick packet. I stared at the bold text at the top. Eviction notice, filed in the Magisterial Court of Hollow Creek. Plaintiff, Marianne Patterson, care of Briargate Residential. It wasn't just a sister kicking me out. It was a legal filing. She had sued me. The humiliation was physical. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. She hadn't even filed it herself. She had used a management company to insulate herself, to make it look professional, to make me look like a delinquent tenant rather than a grieving daughter. I read through the complaint. It claimed I was a guest at sufferance who refused to vacate. It was clinical. It was cold. It was effective. I went back inside, intending to confront her, but the house was empty. Marianne was gone. I went to the back door to check the mail, hoping for a check I was expecting from work. The key slid into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. I tried the front door. Nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked around to the kitchen window, the one we used to sneak out of when we were teenagers. It was painted shut. She had changed the locks. while I was at the grocery store earlier that morning, or while I was sleeping. She had someone come and change the cylinders. I sat on the back porch steps, the eviction notice in my hand, and realized the terrifying truth. Marianne hadn't just reacted to my refusal to leave. You don't get a property management company, file court papers, and change locks in 2 days without preparation. She had been planning this since before the funeral, maybe before they even died. I stood up. I had to get my things. I had to get out. If I stayed, she would have the sheriff drag me out, and I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me in handcuffs. I found the spare key, hidden under the loose brick in the patio. A secret only Dad and I knew. Marianne was thorough, but she wasn't sentimental. She forgot about the brick. I let myself in. The house felt hostile now, like the walls were watching me. I grabbed the largest suitcase I could find and started throwing things into it. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the few photos of Mom and Dad that were still in frames on the mantel. I ran to the basement. I needed boxes. In the corner of the storage room, stacked away from the holiday decorations, were piles of my father's old office files. He had been a meticulous record keeper. Marianne had likely ignored them, thinking them irrelevant trash. I grabbed a plastic bin and started shoving things into it. I didn't know what I was looking for, but a survival instinct had kicked in. I needed proof that I had existed here. My hand landed on an old, dusty accordion folder at the bottom of a stack. It was labeled in my mother's handwriting, Home, 2012 to 2016. It was the wrong box. It didn't belong with the old tax returns. It was heavy, stuffed with papers. I didn't have time to look. I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I shoved the accordion folder into my tote bag, zipped up my suitcase, and ran out the back door just as the front door opened. I didn't look back. I threw my life into the back seat of my 10-year-old sedan. The clothes, the laptop, the stolen memories. I drove 3 towns over, away from Hollow Creek, away from the eyes of the neighbors who thought Marianne was a saint. I pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel off the interstate. It was a place for truckers and people who had nowhere else to go. I paid for a week in cash. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed, the neon light from the sign outside flickering through the curtains, casting a rhythmic red glow on the carpet. I cried then. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for my parents. I cried for the house. I cried for the sister I thought I had. But as the sun began to rise, turning the sky a bruised purple, the tears stopped. I washed my face in the tiny sink. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. I looked exhausted, pale, and small. You always needed someone else to carry you. The words echoed in my head, but they didn't hurt anymore. They burned. I walked over to the small round table by the window. I opened my notebook. I uncapped a pen. I didn't write a diary entry. I didn't write a letter to Marianne. I wrote a header. Phase 1. Survival. Underneath, I started a list. 1. Secure housing. 2. Increase income. 3. Request copy of the deed. 4. Find out why the locks were changed so fast. I looked at the accordion folder sitting on the floor. It was bulging with secrets. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready, but I touched it, my hand resting on the cardboard flap. Marianne wanted me to disappear. She wanted me to be the tragedy she could pity at cocktail parties. She wanted the house, the money, and the narrative. She had the house. She had the money. But she didn't have the truth, and she didn't have me. I picked up the pen again. 5. Do not let her win. I closed the notebook. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut. But around it, something else was forming. It wasn't vengeance. Vengeance is hot and messy. This was cooler. This was a need to understand exactly how I had been erased from my own family. I lay down on the stiff motel sheets and watched the ceiling fan spin. I was 32 years old. I was homeless. I was orphaned. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the quiet one. I was the one watching. And I had a lot of time to watch. The The spare room in Daisy Klein's bungalow in Marrow Glen smelled of vanilla candles and dog shampoo. It was a perfectly nice room, painted a cheerful shade of yellow that Daisy probably thought was welcoming, but to me, it felt like a quarantine zone. I was 32 years old. I had a master's degree. I had a retirement account. And yet, here I was, sleeping on a futon in my best friend's house because my sister had evicted me from my own life. Marrow Glen was only 20 minutes from Hollow Creek, but it felt like a different universe. It was a town of commuters and young families, devoid of the heavy historic silence that draped over my hometown. For the first 2 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I woke up before Daisy, made coffee, and left for work before she could ask me how I was doing. I returned late, usually after she had eaten dinner, to avoid the pitying looks she gave me over the rim of her wineglass. Daisy was a saint. Truly, she had cleared out her crafting supplies to make room for my boxes without a single complaint. But gratitude is a heavy thing to carry when it is mixed with shame. Every time I used her shower, every time I put a carton of milk in her refrigerator, I felt the stinging reality of my displacement. I was a guest, a burden, a woman who had failed to secure her own footing, to keep the panic at bay. I threw myself into my work at the regional library. I was a senior archivist, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. I liked order. I liked preserving the truth of things, while my own history was being rewritten by Marianne. I took solace in cataloging the history of others. I stayed late, reorganizing the microfiche collection, labeling boxes of municipal records from the 1950s, doing anything to avoid going back to the yellow room and the silence. But avoidance has a shelf life. It was a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the funeral. When I finally tried to call Marianne again, I sat on the edge of the futon, my phone heavy in my hand. I told myself I was calling to be reasonable. I told myself I was calling to mediate, to find a sliver of the sister I used to know before the grief and the greed took over. The phone rang 4 times. I expected voicemail. Hello? Her voice was crisp, impatient, background noise, clinking silverware, low chatter. She was out to dinner. Marianne, it's Anna. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear a waiter ask if she wanted a refill on her water. I am busy. Anna, I know, I said, keeping my voice steady, fighting the urge to apologize for existing. We need to talk, not about the house ownership, but about the family things, the photo albums, Dad's watch, Mom's recipe box. You can't just lock me out of our entire history. Marianne. I waited for a sigh, a concession, a moment of shared humanity. Everything is safe, she said, her tone flattening into something robotic. It is all being catalogued. Catalogued? Why? Are you selling it? I am managing the estate. She recited, Marianne, I am not a creditor. I am your sister. Can we just meet for coffee? 10 minutes, please. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of a wall being built. Talk to my lawyer, she said. The words were so cliché, so absurd coming from the woman who had taught me how to braid my hair, that I almost laughed. Your lawyer? Marianne, we grew up in the same bedroom. Do not contact me again. Anna, direct all inquiries to Mr. Halberg or the management company. If you show up at the property, I will file for a restraining order. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone screen until it went black. A restraining order. The threat hung in the air. Toxic and absurd. That was the moment the last thread of denial snapped. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't grief-induced madness. This was war. I set the phone down and looked at the tote bag in the corner of the room, the one with the accordion folder I had stolen from the basement. I hadn't opened it since the motel. I had been too afraid of what I might find, or perhaps too afraid that I would find nothing, that I really was just the crazy, unstable sister Marianne claimed I was. But now, with her threat ringing in my ears, I needed to know what she was protecting so viciously. I pulled the folder out. It was heavy, smelling of mildew and old paper. The label, in Mom's looping cursive, read, Home, 2012 to 2016. I dumped the contents onto the futon. It was a chaotic mess of receipts, bills, and correspondence. My father was organized, but my mother was a piler. She kept everything. I sifted through the noise: electric bills from a cold winter in 2014, a warranty for a lawnmower, a rejection letter for a credit card application. Then, 3 things caught my eye. The first was an invoice from Lakeshore Title and Escrow, dated 4 years ago. It was for a title search and rush processing fee. It was marked paid in red ink. Why would my parents need a rush title search 4 years ago? They had lived in that house for 30 years. They had paid off the mortgage in 2010. We had a party. We burned the loan documents in the backyard fire pit. The second item was a statement from a bank I didn't recognize, Valley Ridge Community Bank. It was for a home equity line of credit. The balance listed was $65,000. I stared at the number. $65,000. My parents were frugal. They drove cars until the wheels fell off. They clipped coupons. Why would they borrow $65,000 against the house they had worked so hard to own outright? And where did the money go? There were no renovations, no big trips, no new cars. The third item was a small, yellow sticky note, stuck to the back of the HELOC statement. It was my mother's handwriting, scrawled in pencil, barely legible. If something happens, ask Reed. Reed. I had assumed Reed meant Mr. Halberg, the family attorney I had tried to call. But as I looked at the context, the secret debt, the title search, I realized I didn't actually know if Reed Halberg was their attorney. I just knew the name. Dad talked about him. Marianne mentioned him. I grabbed my laptop and typed Reed Halberg, Hollow Creek into the search bar. The results didn't show a law firm. They showed a LinkedIn profile. Reed Halberg, procurement manager, retired, Patterson Tool and Supply. He wasn't a lawyer. He was Dad's old coworker, the man Dad sat next to for 20 years. My heart hammered against my ribs. Marianne had told me to talk to her lawyer and mentioned Mr. Halberg in the same breath during the funeral chaos, letting me believe he was the legal authority. But he wasn't. He was just a guy. A guy my mother trusted enough to leave a note about. I needed to find him. The next day, I called in sick to the library, something I never did. I drove back to Hollow Creek, feeling like a spy in my own hometown. I kept my head down, wearing oversized sunglasses, terrified I would run into Marianne or one of her spies. I found Reed Halberg's address in the phone book. He lived on the other side of town, in a small ranch house with a pristine lawn. I knocked on the door. It took a long time for him to answer. When he finally did, he looked older than his LinkedIn photo. He was wearing a cardigan and holding a half-eaten piece of toast. "Mr. Halberg?" I asked. "I am Anna Patterson, John's daughter." His face fell. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of resignation. He sighed, a long, rattling sound in his chest. "I wondered if you would come," he said. He let me in. His living room was dark, the curtains drawn. We sat on plastic-covered sofas. I found a note, I said, cutting straight to the chase. Mom wrote it. It said, "If something happens, ask Reed." Reed rubbed his face with his hands. "Your mother was a worrier. Anna, a good woman, but a worrier." What did she mean? I asked. Why did they take out a $65,000 loan? Where did the money go? Reed looked at me, his eyes watery. They didn't spend it. Anna. They were trying to save it. Save what? The business, he said. My father didn't own a business. He worked for Patterson Tool and Supply. No relation. Just a coincidence of naming that Dad always joked about. He was an employee, not the big shop. Reed corrected. The side thing. Your dad and I. We tried to start a small consulting firm a few years back, just for supply chain logistics. We thought we could make some real money for retirement. We pooled some cash. Your dad leveraged the house to get the capital we needed for the buy-in on some inventory. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. Dad never mentioned this. What happened? I asked. It went south, Reed said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We got bad advice. The inventory was bad. We lost a lot. Your dad was terrified. He was ashamed. He didn't want you or Marianne to know he had risked the house. He was paying it back. Slowly, he was obsessed with fixing it before he died. I sat back, processing this. It explained the debt. It explained the stress I had sensed but couldn't place. But the house? I said, Marianne says the house is hers. She says they transferred the deed to her 6 months ago. Why would they do that if they were in debt? Reed frowned. Transferred to Marianne? That doesn't make sense. Why not? Because the plan was to put the house in a trust, he said. That is what we talked about, to protect it from the creditors if the business loan defaulted. We were looking into it. We were going to set up a trust for both of you girls. He never mentioned giving it solely to Marianne. Are you sure? Reed nodded vigorously. I am sure. Your father loved you girls equally. He wouldn't cut you out, especially not you. Anna. He worried about you. Sure. But he respected you. He always said you were the one with the steady hand. The steady hand. Marianne had called me fragile. She had said I needed to be carried. Dad had seen me differently. I thanked Reed and left. My head was spinning. If the plan was a trust, why was there a deed transfer to Marianne? I drove to the Ridge County Recorder of Deeds office. It was a sterile building with fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly. I walked up to the counter and asked for the property records for 412 Elm Street. The clerk, a bored-looking woman with bright purple fingernails, tapped on her keyboard. Here it is, she said. Deed transfer. Recorded October 12th. That was 3 weeks before the accident. I paid for a printout and took it to a wooden bench in the hallway. I studied the document. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership from John and Sarah Patterson to Marianne Patterson, for the sum of $1. I looked at the signatures. They looked like my parents' signatures, shaky, maybe, but theirs. Then I looked at the notary stamp. Elaine Voss. Commission expires May 2025. I didn't know Elaine Voss, but something about the name nagged at me. I went back to the clerk. Excuse me. I said, is it possible to see other documents notarized by this person? Elaine Voss? The clerk sighed. We can't search by notary, but... She paused, squinting at me. You are not the first person to ask about her this month. What do you mean? We have had a few folks come in asking about deed transfers, she stamped. Weird timing on all of them. Urgent transfers. Seniors. Mostly. A chill went down my spine. A cluster of urgent transfers. I thanked her and walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. The engine off, staring at the deed. Marianne had said this was done to protect the asset. Reed said they wanted a trust. The notary was flagged by the clerk as suspicious. I drove back to Marrow Glen, my mind racing. When I got to Daisy's house, there was a letter waiting for me on the kitchen counter. Daisy had brought in the mail. It had a forwarding sticker on it. It was addressed to the estate of John Patterson. I opened it. It was a bill from Crown Vale Servicing, past due notice. This wasn't the HELOC. This was something else. A personal loan. Unsecured. For $20,000. Originated 6 months ago. I looked at the contact information. The phone number associated with the account was not my parents' landline. It was a mobile number. I recognized the area code. It was a local number. I dialed it on my phone, blocking my caller ID. It rang twice. Hello? The voice was male. Gruff. I didn't recognize it. Is this the number for the Patterson estate? I asked. There was a pause. Then a click. He hung up. I stared at the phone. Who was that? I went into the spare room and pulled out a fresh notebook. The one I had bought at the drugstore the night of the eviction. I opened it to the first blank page. I wrote, Anomalies. 1. Parents had secret debt. HELOC. Confirmed by Reed. 2. Dad intended a trust, not a transfer to Marianne. Confirmed by Reed. 3. Deed transfer happened 3 weeks before death. 4. Notary Elaine Voss is linked to other urgent transfers. 5. Crown Vale loan. $20,000. Unknown phone number attached. I looked at the list. It wasn't proof of fraud. Not yet. It was a collection of shadows. But shadows are cast by solid things. Marianne was playing a game I didn't understand yet. She was moving assets, hiding debts, and using my grief as a smokescreen. She counted on me being the quiet one. She counted on me crumbling under the shame of eviction. She was wrong. I spent the next week living a double life. By day, I was the diligent archivist, discussing preservation techniques and humidity control. By night, I was an investigator. I booked a consultation with Nolan and Spire, a legal aid clinic in the city. I couldn't afford a high-powered shark, but I needed to know where I stood. The lawyer, a young woman named Sarah with tired eyes and a sharp demeanor, listened to my story. She looked at my notebook. She looked at the copy of the deed. "Here is the brutal truth. Anna," she said, leaning back in her chair, "you have a lot of smoke here, but you have no fire." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The notary is suspicious. The intent was different. Intent is hard to prove when you have a signed, notarized deed," she said. "Unless you can prove your parents were coerced, or that the signatures are forged, the document stands, and proving forgery requires experts. Experts cost money. So I just let her steal the house?" Sarah sighed. "If you file a lawsuit now, without hard proof, you will lose, and you will be on the hook for her legal fees. Marianne has the asset. She has the leverage. And here's the other thing. Time matters. How? If you wait too long, the court might say you accepted the situation. It is called lâche. But if you file too soon and lose, you are barred from trying again. You are in a bind." She looked at me with sympathy. "My advice? Don't fight until you have a weapon. Get the records, find the notary, trace the money, but don't blow up the bridge until you are ready to cross it." I walked out of the office feeling heavy. I wanted a champion. I wanted someone to tell me they would fix it. But Sarah was right. I was broke, homeless, and acting on hunches. I drove back to the library. My boss, Mrs. Gable, called me into her office. "Anna," she said, "the board has approved the new assistant director position. We want you to take it." I looked at her. The job meant more money. It also meant 60-hour weeks. It meant I wouldn't have time to drive to Hollow Creek and stake out notaries. It meant I would have to put the investigation on a slow burn. I thought about Marianne in the house. I thought about the perfect life she was curating. I thought about the eviction notice. If I took the job, I could save. I could get my own apartment. I could build a war chest. If I didn't, I would burn out trying to fight a battle I couldn't afford. I looked Mrs. Gable in the eye. "I'll take it," I said. I went back to Daisy's house that night. I packed up the accordion folder. I put the notebook inside it. I slid the box under the bed. I wasn't giving up. I was digging in. I walked into the kitchen where Daisy was making tea. I got a promotion. I said. Daisy squealed and hugged me. "That's amazing. Anna, see? Things are turning around." I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to be very busy. I was going to rebuild. I was going to become the woman my sister didn't believe existed. The woman who could carry herself. And when I was strong enough, when my bank account was full and my evidence was undeniable, I would open that box again." I poured myself a cup of tea. The steam rose up, hot and cleansing. I could wait. I had the truth on my side. And as any archivist knows, the truth doesn't rot. It just waits to be discovered. 5 years was a long time, but I was patient, and I was just getting started. The year turned over quietly. The raw, scraping panic of those first few months had settled into a dull, rhythmic ache, like a bone that had healed crooked. I had a new apartment in the city, a second-floor walk-up with exposed brick and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine every morning at 6. It was not the Victorian on Elm Street. It did not smell of my mother's lavender sachets or my father's pipe tobacco. It smelled of cleaning vinegar and fresh paint. And most importantly, it was mine. I had stabilized. That was the word I used in my head. Stabilization. I had the promotion at the library. I had an emergency fund that had grown from a terrifying 0 to a respectable 3 months of expenses. And I had Tuesday evenings, on Tuesdays, I drove to a nondescript medical building near the mall and sat in a beige waiting room for my appointment with Dr. Aris. I told no one about this, not Daisy, who was still my rock, but tended to treat my trauma like a soap opera she was binging, not my coworkers, who treated me with the careful delicacy reserved for someone who has suffered a vague, unspoken tragedy. In Dr. Aris's office, I didn't have to be the quiet one or the victim. I unpacked the anger. At first, it had been a forest fire, consuming everything. Now, a year later, it was a laser. It was cold. It was precise. I am not looking for revenge. I told Dr. Aris one rainy evening in November, I am looking for the floor. I feel like I am falling through a trapdoor that never ends. I just want to know where the bottom is. Marianne is the one pulling the lever. Doctor, Aris suggested gently. No, I said, looking out the window at the sleek, wet pavement. Marianne is falling too. She just thinks she has a parachute. That was the clarity I had found. My sister wasn't just a villain. Villains are organized. Villains are masterminds. Marianne was frantic. The eviction, the changed locks, the hostility. It wasn't the behavior of someone who had won. It was the behavior of someone terrified of losing. And I intended to find out what she was so afraid of. I began my investigation again. Not with the frantic energy of the evicted sister, but with the methodical patience of an archivist. I requested a complete, certified set of filings from the Ridge County Recorder's Office. I didn't just ask for the deed. I asked for the entire jacket, every scan, every margin note, every stamped page associated with the property ID for the last 10 years. It cost me $45 and took 2 weeks to arrive. When the heavy envelope landed in my mailbox, I didn't rip it open. I made tea. I cleared my dining table. I washed my hands. Then I laid the documents out in chronological order. I read the quitclaim deed again, the one transferring the house to Marianne. I noticed something I had missed in my initial panic. In the legal description of the property, right after the boundary lines, there was a reference code. See corrective affidavit filed concurrently herewith. I frowned. A corrective affidavit is used to fix a clerical error, a misspelled name, a wrong address. If the deed relied on an affidavit, that affidavit should be part of the public record. It should be in the packet. I shuffled through the pages. Mortgage satisfaction from 2010, the original deed from 1982, the quitclaim from last year. There was no affidavit. I checked the page numbers stamped by the recorder's machine. Page 1 of 4, page 2 of 4, page 4 of 4. Page 3 was missing. Marianne had provided me with a copy at the funeral, but that was just the deed face. The official county packet was missing a page in the sequence. I circled the gap in red pen. Why would a page be pulled? Or was it never scanned? I turned my attention to the notary stamp again. Elaine Voss. I had access to the state licensing database through the library's reference portal. It was public information, but you had to know how to query it. I typed in her name, Elaine Voss, commission number 74921, status, suspended. My heart gave a little kick. Suspended, not expired, suspended. I looked at the date of disciplinary action. It was February of the current year, 4 months after she notarized my parents' deed transfer. There were no details listed, just a code for administrative review. A notary doesn't get suspended for a typo. They get suspended for fraud, for notarizing without the signer present, or for backdating documents. If Elaine Voss was corrupt, then the deed she stamped, the paper shield Marianne was hiding behind, was made of glass. I wrote this down in my notebook. The notebook was no longer a frantic list of fears. It was a timeline. It was a case file. That weekend, I went digging into the digital archives. I had my father's old laptop password. He used the name of our first dog and the year he was born. I had logged into his email account months ago, but the sheer volume of spam had overwhelmed me. Now, I use search terms: policy, life, beneficiary, insurance. I found a thread from 3 years ago. It was from a company called Prudent Life. The subject line was, Policy update and beneficiary confirmation. I opened the attachment. It was a term life insurance policy for my father. Face value, $150,000. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating my small living room. At the funeral, when I had asked about insurance to help cover the burial costs, Marianne had shaken her head, her face a mask of tragic exhaustion. There wasn't much. Anna, she had said, Dad let the big policies lapse when he retired. There was just enough to pay the funeral home and maybe cover the property taxes for a year. $150,000 was not much. It was a lifeline. I checked the status of the policy. The last email was a confirmation of a claim payout, dated 2 weeks after the accident. The funds had been wired to an account ending in 449. That wasn't my parents' checking account. I knew their numbers by heart. Marianne had lied. She had taken the money. But here was the question. Where was it? Marianne lived in a nice house, but she and her husband, Caleb, were always complaining about money. Caleb worked in sales and was constantly chasing a commission that never seemed to materialize. If Marianne had pocketed $150,000, she should be flush. She should be renovating her own kitchen, not renting out our parents' house under the table. That was the thought that stopped me. Was she renting it? I needed eyes on the ground. I took a personal day on a Wednesday. I drove to Hollow Creek. I didn't go to the house. I couldn't bear to see it if it had been changed. Or worse, if it looked exactly the same but locked against me. I went to the grocery store on the north side of town, the one where my mother used to buy the specific brand of oat bread she liked. I wandered the aisles, feeling like a ghost. The town hadn't changed, but my place in it had vanished. I turned the corner into the pasta aisle and nearly collided with a cart. Anna? I froze. Marianne was standing there. She looked frayed. That was the only word for it. Marianne was usually impeccable. Her hair was always blow-dried, her makeup precise. Today, her roots were showing. Gray streaks she usually hid aggressively. Her coat, a beige trench she had worn for years, looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite mask. Marianne, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She gripped the handle of her cart. Her knuckles were white. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was breathless. "I still buy groceries. Marianne, I live 40 minutes away. Not on Mars." She looked over her shoulder, scanning the aisle as if she expected someone to jump out. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "It causes talk." "Talk?" I asked. "Who is talking?" "Everyone," she hissed. "They ask about you. They ask why you aren't at the house. And what do you tell them?" "I tell them you needed space, that you were too fragile to handle the memories." The old lie. It was almost comforting in its familiarity. "I am not fragile. Marianne," I said, stepping closer, "I am actually doing very well. I have a new job. A new apartment." She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. She saw the new coat I was wearing. She saw the calmness in my face. It seemed to unsettle her more than my tears ever had. "Good," she said stiffly. "That is good. I'm glad you moved on." "I haven't moved on," I said softly. "I am just moving forward. There is a difference." She flinched. She looked down at her cart. It was filled with generic brands, no organic produce, no expensive wine. "Marianne," I asked. On an impulse I couldn't check. Where did the insurance money go? Her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. "What?" "The Prudent Life Policy. $150,000. I know it existed. I know it was paid out." For a second, I thought she was going to scream. I thought she was going to cause a scene right there in front of the marinara sauce. But she didn't. She slumped. The air went out of her. She took a step toward me, closing the distance, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think I kept it? You think I am on a vacation somewhere?" "I don't know what you are doing," I said. "I just know you lied. You don't know anything," she said, her voice trembling. "You sit in your apartment and judge me. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. Then tell me." "I can't," she said. She looked terrified. Why? She leaned in, her eyes searching mine, and for a split second, the sister was there. The big sister who used to protect me from bullies on the playground. You don't understand what I saved you from. Anna, the words hung in the air, suspended between us. Save me from what? I asked, but the moment broke. A woman from the church choir turned into the aisle, waving a hand. Marianne! Oh, hello? Marianne snapped back into character instantly. It was terrifying to watch. The smile plastered onto her face, the posture straightened. Susan! So good to see you. She turned back to me, her eyes dead again. It was nice to see you. Anna, take care of yourself. She wheeled her cart away, leaving me standing there with a pounding heart. What did she save me from? The question gnawed at me. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a confession. I left the store. But I didn't leave town. I drove past the neighborhood. I parked 2 streets over from Elm Street and walked. I needed to see the house. It looked lived in, but not by Marianne. There were 2 cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. A Honda Civic with out-of-state plates and a rental sedan. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, hidden by the large oak tree. A young couple came out of the front door. They were laughing, carrying tote bags. They looked like tourists. I walked down the block to Mrs. Higgins's house. She was my parents' neighbor to the left. A woman who spent 90% of her life gardening and the other 10% peering through her blinds. I found her in her front yard, deadheading her hydrangeas. Mrs. Higgins? She looked up, squinting. Anna? Good Lord. Child, is that you? She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried over to the fence. We haven't seen you in ages. Marianne said you moved to California. California? Another lie. I am just in the city. Mrs. Higgins, I came to visit. She lowered her voice, leaning over the white picket fence. It is a shame about the house, isn't it? I know Marianne said she couldn't bear to sell it, but having strangers in and out all the time, it just doesn't feel right. Strangers? I asked, feigning ignorance. Oh, you know, the renters. Every weekend it is someone new. Some are nice enough, but last week there was a bachelor party. The noise, I told Marianne. I said, Hearthstay is fine for the lake houses, but not on Elm Street. Hearthstay. Marianne wasn't just renting it. She was short-term renting it. She was running a hotel out of our childhood home, and she was doing it under the table. I knew the zoning laws in Hollow Creek. Short-term rentals were strictly regulated and required a permit. I had checked the permits. There were none for 412 Elm Street. She was generating cash. Fast. Undocumented cash. Why? If she had the insurance money, why did she need the rental income so badly that she would risk a zoning violation? I thanked Mrs. Higgins and walked back to my car. My anger was there, simmering. But it was mixed with a heavy, confusing sadness. I missed my parents. I missed the safety of that house. I felt guilty for spying, for collecting dirt on my own sister. It felt dirty, but then I remembered the eviction notice. I remembered you always needed someone else to carry you. I wasn't doing this to hurt her. I was doing this to stop her from hurting me. And maybe, just maybe, to stop her from drowning. Because what I saved you from implied that there was a threat I couldn't see. I went back to the records the next day. I widened my search. If Marianne was desperate for cash, maybe she had borrowed against the house again. I checked the index for liens. There it was, recorded 6 months ago. Claim of lien, claimant, North Pine Renovations. Amount, $40,000. I stared at the screen. North Pine Renovations. I knew the contractors in Hollow Creek. My father had a list. There was Old Man Miller. There was the heavy-set guy who did the roofing. I had never heard of North Pine. And $40,000? It was a perfectly round number. Construction bills are never round. They are $39,422.16. They include tax and materials. $40,000 flat sounded like a loan, or a payoff. I checked the permit history for the house again. If you do $40,000 worth of renovations, you need a permit. You need inspections. There were 0 permits filed for the property in the last 5 years. Marianne had recorded a lien against the house for work that was never officially approved, and likely never done. Why would you put a lien on your own property? To strip the equity, if you load the house up with debt, or fake debt, it looks worthless on paper. If creditors come looking, if someone tries to sue you, the house looks like a liability, not an asset. Was Marianne hiding the house from someone else? I thought about the urgent transfers the clerk had mentioned. I thought about the suspended notary. I thought about Reed Halberg saying my father was trying to protect the house. A timeline began to form in my head. Jagged and incomplete, but terrifying. 2016. Parents take out secret HELOC to save the business. 2020. Parents die. October 2020. Deed transfers to Marianne via urgent process with a shady notary. November 2020. Marianne evicts me, claims efficiency, January 2021. Insurance payout vanishes. June 2021. Marianne starts illegal rentals. July 2021. North Pine Renovations files a $40,000 lien. It wasn't a grab for wealth, it was a shell game. Marianne was moving money, hiding assets, and generating cash flow, all while looking like she hadn't slept in a year. She wasn't keeping the house to spite me. She was keeping the house to keep it from being seized. But by whom? The answer came to me in the middle of the night. A week later, I was looking at the North Pine lien again. I searched the business address for North Pine Renovations. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall in a town called Oak Haven, 20 miles south. I searched the corporate registration. North Pine Renovations, LLC, registered agent, Gavin Merrow. I didn't know the name Gavin Merrow, but I knew the last name, Marianne's husband, Caleb. His mother's maiden name was Merrow. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Gavin Merrow, Caleb's cousin. The one who had been at the wedding, the one who laughed too loud and drank too much. Marianne had placed a lien on the house in favor of her husband's cousin. She was funneling equity out of the estate and into her husband's family. This wasn't just desperation, this was theft. I closed the laptop. My hand was shaking. You don't understand what I saved you from. Did she save me from the debt? Or did she cut me out so she could use the house to pay off her husband's problems? I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred in the rain. I had wanted the truth. I had wanted to know why I was thrown out. Now I knew. I wasn't thrown out because I was weak. I was thrown out because I was a witness. I went to my closet and pulled out the accordion folder. I placed the printout of the lien inside. I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I needed to know if Marianne was the architect of this fraud, or if she was the victim of it. But one thing was clear. The sister I knew was gone. In her place was a woman who would look me in the eye, tell me she loved me, and then sign my inheritance over to a shell company. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening to the rain, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel like the little sister. I felt like the only adult in the room, and I knew that when I finally went back to Hollow Creek, I wouldn't be asking for permission. I would be asking for an explanation, and I would have the paperwork to back it up. The text message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, disrupting the quiet hum of the archives room. My phone buzzed against the metal desk surface, a jarring sound in a space dedicated to silence. I looked at the screen. The name Marianne flashed in white letters against the black background. I hadn't spoken to my sister in nearly 18 months. We had become strangers who shared DNA and a zip code, orbiting each other in wider and wider circles. I stared at the notification, my heart doing a traitorous little flip in my chest. Hey Anna, it's been too long. The leaves are turning at the house and it made me think of you. Come over for coffee on Saturday? I think we're overdue for a catch-up. Love, M. I read it twice, then a third time. The tone was wrong. It was too breezy, too casual. It was the kind of text you send to a college roommate you haven't seen in a semester. Not the sister you evicted and threatened with a restraining order. Marianne didn't do breezy. Marianne did calculated, if she was reaching out. The ground was shifting. I didn't reply immediately. I waited 3 hours, letting the power dynamic settle, before typing back a single word. Okay. Saturday morning broke cold and bright. I drove the familiar route to Hollow Creek, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't the same woman who had driven away in tears 3 years ago. I had money in the bank. I had a file of evidence thick enough to choke a shredder. I was walking into the lion's den, but this time, I brought my own whip. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked sharp. That was the only word for it. The overgrown hydrangeas Mrs. Higgins had complained about were gone, replaced by tidy, mulched beds of symmetrical boxwoods. The peeling paint on the porch railing had been touched up. It looked like a brochure. Marianne opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, her hair perfectly coiffed. She pulled me into a hug that felt stiff and performative, like we were on a stage and the audience was watching from the street. "I am so glad you came," she said, pulling back to beam at me. "You look great. Anna, city life suits you. It's fine," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. The smell hit me first. It wasn't home. It wasn't the mix of old wood and floor wax I remembered. It smelled of vanilla plug-in air fresheners, cloying and chemical. I walked into the living room and stopped. "Where's the piano?" I asked. The upright Steinway, the one our mother had played every Sunday evening for 30 years, was gone. In its place stood a generic, gray sectional sofa that looked like it had been bought from a catalog the day before. "Oh, that," Marianne said, waving a hand dismissively. "It was so out of tune, Anna. And the wood was warping. I donated it to the high school. It was just taking up space. Donated it. I knew for a fact that piano was worth $10,000. I looked around the room. It was staged. That was the realization that settled in my gut. The family photos were gone, replaced by generic art prints, black and white photos of suspension bridges and abstract swirls. The clutter of life, the magazines, the knickknacks, the Afghans, was erased. It looked like a hotel lobby. I walked to the mantel, my mother's jewelry box. A mahogany chest with pearl inlay that she had inherited from her own mother was usually sitting right there. It was gone. "Where is Mom's jewelry box?" I asked. Marianne stiffened. "I put it in safe storage," she said quickly. "With the renters. You know, I didn't want anything to happen to it." I turned to face her. "The renters? I thought you said you couldn't bear strangers in the house." She flinched, her eyes darting to the window. "Things change. Anna, the market, the upkeep. I had to be practical." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on." I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. It was the same table where she had slid the eviction notice across to me 3 years ago. The memory was so vivid, I could almost see the ghost of the paper sitting between us. Marianne poured coffee into mugs I didn't recognize. They were white, square, and modern. "So," she started, wrapping her hands around her mug. "How are you?" "Really? I am fine. Marianne, I am working. I am saving." She nodded, looking down into her black coffee. I wanted to explain. She said softly, "About the beginning, I waited. I didn't urge her on. I just watched her. It wasn't personal. Anna, I know it felt that way. But Mom and Dad, they left a mess." "A mess?" I asked. Reed told me they were stressed. "But he didn't say it was a mess. Reed doesn't know the half of it," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. "There were debts, Anna. Collectors calling the house the week after the funeral. They were going to take everything. The house, the car, the accounts." She looked up at me, her eyes wet with tears that looked genuinely pained. I had to move fast. If I had let the estate go through probate, the creditors would have swarmed. I transferred the deed to protect it. I evicted you because I needed to show the bank that the property was flexible, that it could generate income. She reached across the table and touched my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back. I did it to save you. Anna, you couldn't have handled the pressure, the phone calls, The threats. I took it all on so you could keep your life. I wanted you to have a fresh start, untainted by their failures. I looked at my sister. It was a beautiful story. It had heroes and villains and a noble sacrifice. It was also, I suspected, about 20% true and 80% fabrication. So the debt is gone? I asked. She hesitated. Mostly. I am still managing it. That is why I rent the house out sometimes, to keep the wolves at bay. And the insurance money? I asked. The $150,000? She froze. That went to the debts immediately. It was gone in a week. Anna. Poof. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. I see. I said, thank you for telling me. I didn't believe her. If the insurance money paid the debts, why was she still renting the house illegally? Why was the jewelry box gone? Why was there a $40,000 lien from her husband's cousin? She was admitting the minimum amount necessary to stop me from digging. She was feeding me a controlled burn to prevent a wildfire. I finished my coffee and stood up. I should go. I said. Marianne looked relieved. Of course. I'm just glad we could talk. We are sisters. Anna. We shouldn't be enemies. I walked to the door. We aren't enemies. Marianne, I said, stepping out onto the porch. We are just people who know different versions of the truth. I drove away feeling a cold, hard knot in my stomach. She was drowning. I could see it in the way her hands shook when she poured the coffee. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was testing the waters to see if I was still pliable. She needed me to be the quiet one again because something was coming. And she needed me out of the way. I needed to talk to Reed again. I found him 2 days later, sitting on a park bench in downtown Hollow Creek, feeding pigeons. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. Frailer, Reed, I said, sitting down next to him. He smiled sadly. Hello. Anna, you look like your mother today. We watched the birds for a moment. Marianne told me there were collectors, I said. She said Mom and Dad left a mess. Reed sighed, scattering a handful of crumbs. They were in debt. Yes, but it wasn't just bad luck. Anna, your father, he suspected something. What do you mean? About 6 months before he died. John came to me. He was looking through the books for the side business, Patterson Tool and Supply. He found invoices for inventory we never ordered, payments to vendors we didn't know. I sat up straighter. Forged invoices? He nodded. He thought someone was siphoning money, bleeding the accounts dry. That was why they needed the HELOC, to cover the holes in the ledger. Did he know who it was? Reed shook his head. He wasn't sure, but he said it had to be someone inside, someone who had access to the account numbers. He was getting ready to audit the whole thing, and then, the accident. I felt a chill. Did Marianne know? I don't know, Reed said, but I know Caleb used to help us with the book sometimes, when we were swamped. He's an accountant. You know, Caleb, Marianne's husband. I went home and opened the accordion folder. I pulled out the North Pine renovations lien I had found a year ago. Claimant, Gavin Marrow. Gavin was Caleb's cousin. I pulled out the bank statements I had managed to get from the trash box Marianne had left on the curb during one of my stealth drive-bys a few months prior. They were fragmented, just a few pages from an estate account she hadn't shredded. I lined them up. October 15th. Withdrawal, $5,000. October 16th. Payment to North Pine renovations, $5,000. November 1st. Withdrawal, $3,500. November 2nd. Payment to North Pine renovations, $3,500. It wasn't a renovation. It was a loop. She was taking money out of the estate account, money that should have been used to pay off the legitimate debts she claimed were so crushing, and funneling it to North Pine, to Gavin, and likely, back to Caleb. She wasn't saving me from debt. She was manufacturing it. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by papers, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel angry. I felt exhausted. My phone beeped. I picked it up. It wasn't a text. It was a voicemail notification. But it wasn't new. I had been transferring files to a new phone earlier that day, and a batch of old saved messages had populated. One was dated 3 years ago, 2 days before the accident. Dad. I stared at the screen. I hadn't listened to his voice since the funeral. I hadn't let myself. I was too busy being the detective. Too busy being the victim. I pressed play. Hey, Annie girl? His voice was warm, crackly with static. Just calling to see how the new apartment is. Your mom and I are, well, we're working on some things. Clearing the decks. I want to talk to you about it next week when we come up for dinner. It's going to be okay. I promise. You're the strong one. Kiddo. Always have been. Love you. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex. The engine idling. You're the strong one. Marianne had told me I needed to be carried. Dad had told me I was strong. For 3 years. I had been running on a fuel of spite. I wanted to prove Marianne wrong. I wanted to win. But listening to his voice, hearing the tiredness and the love in it, I realized I had been using the investigation to keep him at a distance. If I was solving his murder, financial murder, anyway, I didn't have to accept that he was gone. I turned the engine off. I put my forehead against the steering wheel, and I wept. I cried for the mess they were in. I cried for the betrayal my father must have felt when he saw those invoices. I cried for the sister I had lost, and the sister who had become a monster to survive her own husband's greed. I let it hurt. I let the grief wash over me, hot and suffocating, and when it passed, I didn't feel weak. I felt cleared out. I wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. I was fighting for the man who believed I was strong. The seasons turned. Year 4 arrived with a gray, relentless winter. I was at work when the letter came. The receptionist handed it to me with a concerned look. Certified mail. Anna, you have to sign. I signed. The return address was a law firm in Philadelphia representing Crown Vale Servicing. I opened it in the break room. Notice of pending foreclosure action. 2. The estate of John Patterson, Marianne Patterson, and Anna Patterson. Interested party. Default on loan, instrument, ending in 8892. Foreclosure. Marianne had stopped paying the mortgage, or rather, the HELOC, the $65,000 loan my parents had taken out. The notice stated that the account was 6 months in arrears. I stared at the paper. Marianne had told me she handled the debts. She had taken the insurance money. She was renting the house out. She was siphoning money to North Pine. Where was the money going? If she wasn't paying the mortgage, the house was going to be sold at a sheriff's sale. And if that happened, everything, the evidence, the equity, the history would be gone. Marianne was losing control. The spinning plates were crashing down. I couldn't use legal aid for this. This wasn't a landlord-tenant dispute anymore. This was complex estate fraud with a foreclosure clock ticking. I needed a shark. I researched for 3 nights. I found Celia Drummond at Drummond Lake, LLP. Her reviews were intimidating. Aggressive. Unrelenting. Expensive. I cashed out a chunk of my emergency fund. I put on my best suit. I walked into her office in the city, a glass-walled fortress that smelled of money and intimidation. Celia was a woman in her 60s with a bob cut so sharp it could cut glass. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. She looked at my notebook. She looked at the North Pine lien. She looked at the foreclosure notice. Then she took off her glasses. "You have a mess, Ms. Patterson," she said. Her voice was gravelly and low. "But you also have leverage." "Leverage?" I asked. "Marianne is playing a dangerous game." Celia said, "She has commingled funds. She has likely committed insurance fraud if she diverted the payout. She has created fictitious debt with this North Pine entity. These are felonies." I felt a cold stone in my stomach. "I don't want her to go to prison." I said quietly, "She is my sister." Celia looked at me, her eyes hard. "She is trying to steal your inheritance and she is about to lose the property to a bank. If we intervene, we have to intervene with force. We have to allege fraud to stop the foreclosure. We have to open the estate records. And once we do that, the district attorney might get interested. You need to decide right now. Anna, do you want the truth? Or do you want to protect your sister? Because you might not be able to do both. I thought about the eviction notice. I thought about the perfect life Marianne was pretending to live. I thought about Dad's voicemail. I want the house back, I said, and I want to know exactly what she did. Celia nodded. Then we dig. 2 weeks later, Celia called me. Come in, she said. We found something. I went to her office. She had a large monitor on her desk. My investigator did a digital forensic sweep of the county records. She said, we were looking at the deed transfer again. The one with the missing affidavit? I asked. Yes. But we found something else. We looked at your father's investment accounts. Specifically, the transfer on death designations, TODs. They bypass probate. If you name a beneficiary, the money goes straight to them when you die. Your father had a small brokerage account, Celia said. About $80,000. It had a TOD designation. To who? To Marianne Patterson. Sole beneficiary? I nodded. That hurt. But it wasn't illegal. Wait, Celia said. Look at the timestamp. She pointed to the screen. The designation was updated online. Date: October 24th, 2020. That was 4 days after my father died. I stared at the screen. That's impossible. I whispered, you can't change a beneficiary after death. You can if you have his password, Celia said grimly, and if you log in from his computer. But Mom and Dad's computer was at the house. Exactly, Celia said. We traced the IP address of the change. It didn't come from the house on Elm Street. Where did it come from? It came from an IP address registered to a residential internet account in Marrow Glen. I frowned. Marrow Glen? That was where Daisy lived. That was where I had stayed. The account is registered to Caleb Rusk. Celia said, Marianne's house. She logged into Dad's account from her own living room, 4 days after he died, and changed the beneficiary to herself. That wasn't protecting the asset. That wasn't handling the mess. That was theft. Pure and simple. She stole $80,000, I said, my voice shaking. And that is just what we found today, Celia said. I sat back in the leather chair. The room spun slightly. For 4 years, Marianne had told me I was the weak one. She had told me I was unstable. She had told me she was the martyr carrying the family burden. But she was just a thief who had panicked, and then gotten greedy. Celia looked at me. This changes everything. Anna, this is undeniable proof of intent. We can freeze everything. We can force a full accounting. But like I said, this is a bell you can't unring if we file this. She is done. I looked at the screen. I saw the date. I saw the IP address. I thought about the come for coffee text. I thought about the way she looked at me in the kitchen, lying to my face with tears in her eyes. She didn't just steal the money. She stole my grief. She made me believe my parents didn't trust me. She made me doubt the only people who had ever really loved me. File it, I said. Celia typed a note on her keyboard. We will draft the petition. But first, we need to stop that foreclosure. We are going to file an emergency injunction. We are going to claim that the current owner obtained the title through fraud. What happens then? Then, Celia said, closing the folder, we go to war. I left the office and walked out into the city streets. It was raining again. A cold, biting drizzle. I pulled my coat tighter around me. I wasn't Anna the victim anymore. I wasn't Anna the archivist. I was the executioner. And as I walked toward the train station, I took out my phone and looked at the picture of the house I kept as my background. Hang on, I whispered to the empty porch. I'm coming. The 5th year began not with a bang, but with a ringtone. It was a Tuesday morning in January, the kind of day where the sky is a flat, unyielding sheet of slate and the air bites at your exposed skin. I was in my office at the library, finalizing the budget for the upcoming fiscal year, when my phone lit up. Marianne. I watched the name pulse on the screen. We had not spoken since the coffee date 3 months prior. The one where she had lied to my face about the insurance money. My lawyer, Celia Drummond, was currently drafting a petition to freeze the estate assets, but we hadn't served it yet. We were waiting for one last piece of the financial puzzle to click into place. I answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Marianne. Anna. Thank God." Her voice was wet, thick with tears. It was a sound I hadn't heard since we were children. The sound of Marianne losing her grip. Usually, even in crisis. She was a creature of sharp edges and commands. This was different. This was raw panic. "What is wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's the house," she sobbed. "They are going to take it. The foreclosure. I thought I had more time. I thought I could fix it. But the sheriff's sale is scheduled for next month. I knew this. Of course, I had the alert set up on my laptop. But I let her talk. I need you. Anna, I need your help." "My help?" I asked. "You evicted me. Marianne, you told me I was a liability." I know. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, Anna, you are the only family I have left. You are the only one who can help me save Mom and Dad's legacy." Legacy. That word again. She used it like a shield. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I found a lender," she said, her breath hitching. "A private group. They are willing to refinance the whole mess. Pay off the liens. Pay off the mortgage. Reset the clock. But because of the title issues. Because you committed fraud?" I thought, "Because the deed history is complicated," she continued, avoiding the truth. "They need a cosigner, or rather, a guarantor, someone with a clean credit history and a connection to the original owners. They need you to sign off on the new loan structure, just as a formality, to show family unity. Family unity." The irony was so sharp it almost cut my tongue. 5 years ago, she had handed me an occupancy agreement and told me I was a guest at sufferance. Now, when the walls were closing in, I was family again. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow, at Lakeshore Title and Escrow. Please, Anna, if we don't sign tomorrow, the deal falls through and the house is gone." I looked at the calendar on my wall. I looked at the file Celia had prepared. "I'll be there," I said. I hung up and immediately called Celia. "She wants you to sign a refinance package?" Celia asked, her voice crackling with skepticism over the speakerphone. "Yes, she says it is to save the house. It is a trap. Anna, she is trying to get you to ratify the debt. If you sign as a guarantor, you are validating her ownership and accepting liability for the loans she took out. You will be on the hook for the money she stole." "I know." I said, "I am not going to sign." "Then why go?" "Because I need to see the paperwork." I said, "If she has a new lender, that means there is a new payoff statement. That means there is a breakdown of exactly where the money is going. I want to see who is getting paid." Celia hummed in approval. "Smart. But be careful. Do not sign anything, not even an attendance sheet. Stall. Tell them you need independent counsel to review it. Use the quiet sister routine if you have to. Make them think you are overwhelmed." I hung up and stared out the window. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was ready. Lakeshore Title and Escrow was located in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. The office smelled of toner and nervous sweat. When I walked in, the tension was palpable. Marianne was sitting at the long mahogany conference table. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Next to her sat Caleb, her husband. He looked defensive. His arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set tight, and across from them sat a man I didn't know. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, and he had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Anna!" Marianne cried, jumping up to hug me. Thank you for coming." I let her embrace me. She felt thin, fragile. "Let's just see what this is about," I said. Pulling away gently, I sat down. The man in the shiny suit pushed a stack of documents toward me. "Ms. Patterson," he said smoothly. "I am Mr. Vance. I represent the lending group. We are very happy to be able to assist your sister in stabilizing this asset." I looked at the stack. It was thick, easily 100 pages. "I would like to see the settlement statement first," I said. "The closing disclosure." "Mr. Vance blinked. He hadn't expected the request. He shuffled some papers and pulled out a spreadsheet. Standard payoff structure, he said. I scanned the lines. Payoff to Crown Vale. Servicing, $68,000. That was the HELOC. Payoff to North Pine Renovations, $42,000. That was the lien. Then my finger stopped on a line item near the bottom. Payoff to Marrow Holdings, LLC, $85,000. Promissory note dated 2 years ago. I looked up. What is Marrow Holdings? I asked. Caleb shifted in his seat. The leather chair creaked loudly. It is a private creditor, Caleb said quickly. A bridge loan we took out to do repairs. Repairs? I asked. What repairs? The house looks exactly the same. Caleb. Except for the furniture you sold. It was structural, Marianne interjected, her voice shrill. The foundation, the roof, you don't see it. But it cost a fortune. I looked back at the document. Marrow Holdings, Gavin Marrow, Caleb's cousin. This wasn't a refinance. This was a laundering operation. They were using a new loan to pay off a fake debt to Caleb's family. They were extracting another $85,000 of equity out of the house, washing it through a shell company, and sticking me with the bill if they defaulted. And the payoff quote was inflated. The total loan amount was nearly $200,000. The house was barely worth $250,000 in the current market. They were stripping it to the studs. We need your signature here, here, and here. Mr. Vance said, pointing to the yellow flags. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. I channeled the Anna they expected, the hesitant, risk-averse librarian. This is a lot of money, I said softly. It is the only way to save the house. Marianne pleaded, Anna, please, Mom and Dad would want us to do this. They would want the house to stay in the family. I looked at her. Mom and Dad would want to know why there is an $85,000 note to a company I have never heard of. It is complex business finance. Anna, Caleb snapped, you wouldn't understand. I understand math. Caleb, I said, and these numbers don't add up. I stood up. I can't sign this today. Marianne's face went white. What? Anna, the deadline is tomorrow. I need my lawyer to review it. I said, you don't need a lawyer, Marianne screamed, standing up. It is a standard form. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why do you always have to ruin everything? I looked at her. Calmly, quietly. I am not ruining it. Marianne, I am reading it. I picked up the closing disclosure. I will take this with me. Mr. Vance reached out. That is confidential. I am a prospective guarantor. I said sharply. It is my right to review the terms. I walked out of the office with the document in my hand. Marianne was screaming my name in the parking lot, but I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away. I didn't go home. I went to Celia's office. We scanned the document. Celia's team went to work. We filed a formal records request that afternoon, attaching the settlement statement as Exhibit A in our fraud petition. We argued that the Marrow Holdings debt was fictitious and that the refinance was a predatory attempt to defraud the estate. 2 days later, the bank statements we had subpoenaed months ago finally arrived. They were a smoking gun. They showed the flow of money from the temporary account Marianne had opened right after the funeral, the one she had illegally funneled the insurance money into. It wasn't just North Pine. There were transfers to C. Rusk Consulting, transfers to G. Marrow, payments for a lease on a luxury SUV, payments to a private school in the next county, for Caleb's niece, self-dealing, embezzlement. Marianne hadn't just mismanaged the estate. She had treated it like a personal piggy bank to buy the affection of her husband's family. She was buying her way into their good graces with our parents' money. But the most devastating discovery wasn't in the bank statements. It was in the physical file Celia's investigator had retrieved from the archives of the notary. Elaine Voss, who had turned state's evidence on a separate fraud case. It was a draft of a will my mother had written 3 years before she died. She had never finalized it, but she had kept it. Attached to the draft was a handwritten letter addressed to me. My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I have spent so many nights worrying about what I leave behind. Not the things, but the feelings. You have always been the quiet one, the observer. People mistake that for weakness, but I know it is strength. You see things clearly. Marianne is complicated. She feels things so big, so loud. She acts before she thinks. She has a hole in her heart that she tries to fill with control. I worry that when we are gone, she will try to consume everything to make herself feel safe. I am leaving you this note to ask you a favor that no mother should have to ask. Watch her. Forgive her. Because she is your sister and she is terrified of the world. But verify. Anna, do not let her bulldoze you. You are the keel of this ship. You are the one who keeps it upright. Forgive, but verify. Love, Mom. I sat in my apartment, holding the photocopy of the letter. For 5 years. Marianne had told me I was the one who needed caring. She had told me I was the burden. But Mom knew. Mom knew that Marianne was the danger. Mom knew that I was the safeguard. I wasn't the victim of this story. I was the appointed guardian. The grief hit me then. A wave so powerful it knocked the wind out of me. I wasn't grieving the house. I was grieving the fact that my mother had lived with this fear. She had lived knowing that one daughter was a predator in waiting, and the other would have to be the prey, until she learned to bite back. I wiped my eyes. Okay, Mom, I whispered. I verified. Now comes the hard part. I called Celia. Set up the meeting. I said, the meeting? Everyone. Marianne, Caleb, Gavin, and the representative from Crown Vale. Tell them I am ready to talk about a settlement. You are not settling. Celia said. No. I said, but they don't know that. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon in the conference room of Drummond Lake. It was a power move. My turf. My high-rise view. Marianne arrived looking exhausted but hopeful. She thought I had cracked. She thought I was going to sign the refinance deal to save the family. Caleb was wearing a suit that was too tight. Gavin Marrow, the cousin, strolled in like he owned the place, chewing gum. The Crown Vale representative, a bored-looking woman named Ms. Lynn, sat at the end of the table checking her phone. I sat at the head of the table. Celia sat to my right. Thank you all for coming. I said. Marianne smiled. A tremulous, desperate thing. I am just so glad we are all here, she said. To fix this, I opened my folder. We are here to discuss the future of the property at 412 Elm Street, I said, and the outstanding debts associated with it. I turned to Gavin. Mr. Marrow, I see you hold a promissory note for $85,000 against the estate. Gavin stopped chewing. Yeah, that's right. Construction loan. Do you have the invoices for the materials? I asked. He scoffed. Look, lady, I don't carry my filing cabinet with me. Marianne has all that. Marianne nodded quickly. I have them at home. Anna, it is all legitimate. I turned to Ms. Lynn from Crown Vale. Ms. Lynn, your bank holds the first position lien for the HELOC. Are you aware of the secondary financing proposed by Mr. Marrow? Miss Lynn looked up. We are aware there are other claims. We just want to be paid. We are moving to foreclosure unless the balance is satisfied. I looked at Caleb. Caleb, you handle the accounting for the family, correct? He crossed his arms. I help out. Marianne handles the estate. So you weren't aware of the transfer of $15,000 from the estate account to C. Rusk Consulting on November 12th, 2021? The room went dead silent. Caleb's face turned a blotchy red. That was for services rendered. Consulting on the property management. Management of an illegal rental? I asked. Marianne gasped. It wasn't illegal. We were just... I held up a hand. Stop. I looked at Gavin again. Mr. Marrow, when exactly did you issue this loan to the estate? Gavin leaned back, trying to look bored. Couple years ago. When the roof needed doing. Strange. I said, because the promissory note is dated January of this year, but the lien was filed 3 years ago. Gavin blinked. We refiled it, to update the interest. Right, I said. And the funds for the loan? Where did they originate? From my business. He said, Marrow Holdings. I looked at the bank statement in front of me. That is interesting. Because I have the statement for the estate account here. It shows a transfer of $5,000 to Marrow Holdings on the same day you claim to have lent money to the estate. Gavin froze. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the table, and I continued, my voice hardening. I found something else. In the metadata of the promissory note you submitted to the title company, I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a screenshot of the file properties. Author, C. Rusk, created, last Tuesday. You didn't lend money. Gavin. Caleb wrote a fake note on his laptop last week, so you could claim $85,000 from the refinance. You are trying to steal equity from a house you don't own. Gavin stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. This is a witch hunt. Marianne, tell her about the insurance money. I froze. Marianne's eyes went wide. She reached out and grabbed Gavin's arm. Gavin, shut up. No, I said softly. Let him speak. What about the insurance money? Gavin? He sneered at me. The payout, the 150 grand? You think that just vanished? It went to pay off the real debts, the ones your old man racked up with the bookie. Bookie? I looked at Marianne. What is he talking about? Marianne put her head in her hands. Dad didn't have a gambling problem. She whispered, Then what? I demanded. Caleb spoke up, his voice sullen. It wasn't a bookie. It was a settlement. Your dad messed up a supply order, a big one. For a client in Jersey, they were going to sue. He settled with them privately to keep his job. He borrowed the money from a loan shark. A loan shark. I looked at Reed's words in my notebook. Bad advice. Bad inventory. It wasn't a business failure. It was a mistake. A frantic, terrifying mistake that my father had tried to fix. And you knew? I asked Marianne. She nodded, tears leaking through her fingers. I found out after the funeral. The guys. They came to the house. They threatened to burn it down. That is why I evicted you. Anna, I had to get you out. I had to pay them. I used the insurance money. But it wasn't enough, so I started the rentals. I brought Gavin in to help with the security. Gavin crossed his arms. Yeah, we kept the place safe. And yeah, we took a cut. We earned it. I looked at the three of them. My sister, terrified and weak. Her husband, an opportunist who saw a cash cow. His cousin, a thug who was bleeding the carcass dry. Marianne didn't just get manipulated, she invited them in. She opened the door to the wolves because she was too proud to ask for help from the police. Or from me. She wanted to handle it. She wanted to be the hero. And instead, she became the villain. I stood up. The meeting is over. I said, Ms. Lynn looked up. What about the foreclosure? I turned to Celia. File the petition, I said. Celia nodded and pulled a thick document from her briefcase. She slid it toward Ms. Lynn. This is a copy of the emergency petition for injunctive relief filed this morning in Ridge County Orphans Court. We are alleging fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit theft against the estate. We are asking the court to freeze all assets, stay the foreclosure, and remove Marianne Patterson as executrix. Marianne looked up, her face pale as ash. Anna, you can't. They will go to jail. I looked at her. I felt a profound, aching pity. But I also felt the steel in my spine that my mother had put there. I am verifying. Marianne, I said, just like Mom asked. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't go back to work. I drove to a quiet spot by the river, a place where my father used to take us fishing. I took out my phone. I opened the voice recorder app. I needed to say this out loud. I needed to hear it, because tomorrow, the world would call me the sister who sued her family. Tomorrow, the town would whisper that I was greedy. Marianne would spin her story of victimization. I pressed record. My name is Anna Patterson. I am the daughter of John and Sarah Patterson. For 5 years, I have been told that I am the weak one, that I am the one who needs to be protected. But that was a lie. A lie told by people who needed me to be weak so they could be strong. I am not doing this for the house. I don't care about the wood and the brick. I am doing this because the truth matters. I am doing this because my parents worked for 40 years to build a life, and I will not let it be looted by fear and greed. I love my sister, but love is not a license to steal. Love is not a shield for abuse. I am drawing a line, not in the sand, but in the stone. I am the one who verifies, and I am ready. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I watched the river flow, dark and steady. The storm was coming. The court hearing was set. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was just clear. I started the car. It was time to go home. The petition hit the docket like a bomb. Ridge County Orphans Court. Case number 2-026-402. In re. Estate of John and Sarah Patterson. It wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a legal siege. Celia's filing froze everything. The refinance, the foreclosure, the bank accounts. It forced Marianne out of the shadows and into the stark, fluorescent light of a courtroom where her tears wouldn't count as currency. The hearing was set for Thursday. On Tuesday night, the storm arrived at my door. I was in my apartment, reviewing the binder of evidence Celia had prepared. The rain was lashing against the window pane, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my head. Then came the knock, urgent, heavy. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Marianne stood in the hallway, dripping wet. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a heavy cardigan soaked through at the shoulders. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. She looked like a shipwreck. "Anna," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, let me in." I unlocked the chain and opened the door. I didn't offer her a towel. I didn't offer her tea. I stood back and let her enter the space I had built without her. She stood in the center of my living room, shivering. She looked around at my books, my rug, the life I had scraped together from the ashes she left behind. "You have to stop this," she whispered. "You have to drop the petition." "I can't do that." "Marianne." "You are going to destroy us," she cried, turning on me. "Do you know what happens if the judge uncovers the accounts? Caleb will lose his license. Gavin will go to jail. And me? Anna. They will take everything. I will be destitute. You should have thought of that before you stole my inheritance." I said quietly, "Before you evicted me. Before you let Gavin Marrow bleed the estate dry." "I did it for us," she screamed. "No," I said, "you did it for you. You were scared." "Marianne, I get that. But instead of coming to me, instead of treating me like a partner, you treated me like a casualty. You decided I was expendable." She reached out, grabbing my shoulders. Her hands were ice cold. "I am sorry. Okay? Is that what you want? I am sorry I kicked you out. I am sorry I lied. I was drowning. Anna, I was so scared. Please, just tell the lawyer it was a misunderstanding. Tell her we worked it out. We can sell the house. I will give you half. I promise." I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, real and raw, but beneath it, I saw the calculation. She was bargaining. She was trying to buy her life back with money she didn't have. "It is too late for promises." "Marianne," I said, stepping out of her grip, "the court has the documents. The judge has seen the bank transfers. It is out of my hands." Her face changed instantly. The tragic sister vanished, replaced by the woman who had sneered at me in the kitchen 5 years ago. "You selfish little bitch," she spat. The venom was so sudden, so familiar, that I almost laughed. "There it is," I said. "You always were a burden," she hissed. "Mom and Dad knew it. That is why they trusted me. That is why I had to handle everything, because you are too weak to do what needs to be done. You would have let the loan sharks burn the house down. I saved it. And this is how you repay me? By dragging our name through the mud?" I walked to the door and opened it. "Get out. Marianne." She stared at me, her chest heaving. "If you go through with this," she said, her voice dropping to a low threat, "you will never have a family again. No one will forgive you. The town will know you destroyed your own sister." I looked her in the eye. "The town will know the truth. And as for family, I think I have already lost the only family that mattered. She stormed out, the sound of her heels echoing down the hallway like gunshots. I locked the door. I didn't cry. I felt lighter. She had shown me exactly who she was. The love was conditional. The apology was a transaction. Thursday morning, the Ridge County Courthouse. The air in the courtroom was stale and smelled of floor wax. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Celia. My back was straight, my hands clasped on the table. I could feel the eyes on me. Half of Hollow Creek seemed to be in the gallery. Mrs. Higgins was there, the lady from the bakery, people who had known my parents for 30 years. They whispered behind their hands. I caught snippets. Actually suing her own sister. Marianne looked so worn out, and they're still being greedy. Marianne had done her work well. She sat at the defense table, looking small and fragile in a gray suit. Caleb sat next to her, looking like he wanted to vomit. Their lawyer, a local man named Mr. Abernathy, looked out of his depth. The judge, the Honorable Marcus Sterling, entered. He was a man known for his impatience with family drama. All rise. We stood. We sat. The hearing began. Mr. Abernathy started with a passionate opening statement about family unity, about the burden of executorship, about how Marianne had heroically managed a complex estate in the face of overwhelming debt. He painted me as the estranged, ungrateful sister returning to pick the bones of the carcass. It was a good story. The gallery murmured in sympathy. Then it was Celia's turn. She didn't tell a story. She presented a timeline. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. This is not a case about family dynamics. This is a case about math, and the math does not add up. She put the first exhibit on the overhead projector. Exhibit A, the deed transfer. We asked the court to note the missing affidavit, she said, and the fact that the notary, Elaine Voss, was suspended for fraud shortly after this document was stamped. Exhibit B, the bank statements. Here we see a deposit of $150,000 from Prudent Life Insurance, Celia continued. And here we see a transfer of $15,000 to C. Rusk Consulting, and here $5,000 to Marrow Holdings. These are not debts, Your Honor. These are payments to the executrix's husband and his family. The murmurs in the gallery shifted. Mrs. Higgins frowned. Marianne stared straight ahead, her face a mask. Exhibit C, the rental income. Ms. Patterson claims the house was a liability, Celia said. Yet we have sworn affidavits from 3 neighbors confirming the property was used as a short-term rental for 4 years. No income was reported to the estate. No taxes were paid. Celia paused. This is not management, Your Honor. This is looting. Mr. Abernathy stood up, flustered. Objection. These are characterizations. The estate was in crisis. My client had to make emergency decisions. Judge Sterling looked over his glasses. Mr. Abernathy, emergency decisions usually involve selling assets, not funneling cash to the executor's spouse. Do you have an accounting for the Marrow Holdings loan? Yes. Your Honor, Mr. Abernathy said, fumbling with his briefcase. We have a document. It was just located. A corrective affidavit. It clarifies the original deed transfer and the debt structure. He marched up to the bench and handed a paper to the judge. He handed a copy to Celia. I looked at it. It was a document titled Affidavit of Debt and Correction. It was signed by my father. It stated that he owed $85,000 to Marrow Holdings and authorized the transfer of the deed to Marianne to settle the debt. The room went silent. If this was real, my case was dead. If my father had authorized this, Marianne was in the clear. Celia looked at the document. She squinted. Then she looked at the metadata stamp at the bottom of the page. It was faint, almost microscopic, generated by the printer. Your Honor, Celia said, her voice deadly calm. I would like to draw the court's attention to the footer of this document. Judge Sterling looked closer. It says, V4_draft_01_24_26. The judge read, January 24th, 2026. Celia repeated, "That was 3 days ago." The gallery gasped. Mr. Abernathy froze. Marianne closed her eyes. "This document," Celia said, holding it up, "purports to be signed by John Patterson in 2020, yet it was printed from a computer 3 days ago. Unless the decedent has access to Microsoft Word in the afterlife, this is a forgery." The judge slammed the paper down. His face was thunderous. "Mr. Abernathy," he boomed, "did you submit this document knowing it was fabricated?" I didn't. My client provided it." "Mr. Abernathy stammered, backing away from the bench. The judge turned his gaze to Marianne. It was a look that could strip paint. "Ms. Patterson," he said, "you are under oath. Did you forge this document?" Marianne stood up. She looked at the judge. She looked at Caleb, who was staring at his shoes. She looked at me. And finally, the mask broke. "I had to," she whispered. "Speak up," the judge ordered. "I had to," she screamed, her voice cracking. "They were going to take the house. The loan sharks. They said they would hurt Caleb. They said they would hurt Anna. I didn't have a choice. I just needed the paper to match the story." The courtroom erupted. The gavel banged. But no one heard it. Judge Sterling called for a recess. "Counsel, in my chambers. Now." I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench. The gallery had been cleared, but the whispers still hung in the air. Marianne sat on the opposite bench, 10 feet away. Caleb was gone. He had fled the moment the recess was called. She was alone. She looked at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and utterly defeated. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "About the sharks? About the threats?" She laughed. A bitter, jagged sound. "Tell you? Anna, you were the baby. You were the one with the perfect grades and the quiet life. Dad always said, 'Don't worry, Anna. Let Marianne handle the messy stuff.' So I handled it. I handled the gambling debt. I handled the threats. I handled the lies." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I was protecting you," she said. "I didn't want you to know he wasn't the hero you thought he was. I didn't want you to know we were broke. I wanted you to keep your memories." "So you destroyed my reality to save my memories?" I asked. She looked at the floor. "I was jealous," she whispered. "You got to be the good one. I had to be the fixer. And when the fixer fails, she becomes the monster. I was so afraid the house would be lost and everyone would see that I failed, that I let Dad down. So I pushed you out. If you were gone, you couldn't see the cracks." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the sister who had carried the weight of our parents' secrets until it broke her spine. I saw the pride that had curdled into toxicity. "You didn't protect me, Marianne," I said softly. "You underestimated me." The door to the chambers opened. Celia came out. She looked grim but satisfied. She sat down next to me. "Here is the offer," she said. "The judge is furious. He is ready to refer this to the district attorney for perjury and fraud. Caleb and Gavin are definitely facing charges, but for Marianne, he is giving us a choice." "What choice?" "If she agrees to a full settlement right now, signs over the house to you, pays back the stolen funds from her share of the remaining assets, and steps down as executrix, we can seal the record on the fraud. She avoids jail. She avoids a felony record, but she leaves with nothing. And if we don't settle, then we go back in there. The judge issues a finding of fraud, and she leaves in handcuffs." I looked at Marianne. She was watching us, terrifyingly still. She knew her life was hanging on my next word. She had evicted me. She had lied to me. She had stolen from me. She had tried to frame me as weak. Justice said she should burn. But I looked at her hands, the same hands that had braided my hair, the same hands that had held mine at the funeral. I thought about my mother's letter. "Forgive, but verify." I verified. "Mom," I thought, "now I have to choose." I turned to Celia. "Take the settlement," I said. Celia looked surprised. "Are you sure? She tried to frame you." "I know," I said, "but I don't want her in a cage. I just want her out of my house, and I want her out of my life. Celia nodded. Done. She walked over to Mr. Abernathy. They spoke in hushed tones. Marianne signed the papers on the bench, her tears falling onto the legal pad. She didn't look at me again. She walked out of the courthouse alone, into the rain, a woman with no house, no husband, and no sister. I stood on the steps of the courthouse. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. It was over. I drove to 412 Elm Street. I had the court order in my purse. I had the keys. Mr. Abernathy had surrendered them. I unlocked the front door. The house was silent. The staging furniture was still there, the gray sectional-looking alien in the living room. The air smelled of the vanilla plug-ins. I walked through the rooms, the kitchen where we ate breakfast, the dining room where we had Christmas dinner, the basement where I found the accordion folder. It felt empty. The victory wasn't a trumpet blast. It was a quiet exhale. I walked up the stairs to my old bedroom. It was still empty, save for a few boxes Marianne hadn't cleared out. I opened the closet. On the top shelf, pushed to the back, was a small wooden box, my mother's recipe box. Marianne hadn't sold it. She had hidden it. Maybe she couldn't bear to let it go. Or maybe she couldn't bear to look at it. I took it down. I opened it. The smell of old paper and cinnamon wafted out. The first real smell I had found in the house. I flipped through the cards. Apple pie, pot roast, lemon squares. I pulled out the card for Sunday chicken. It was stained with gravy spots from 20 years ago. I turned it over. There, in my mother's handwriting, was a note. She often wrote little prayers or thoughts on the back of cards. Choose peace, but don't surrender. I ran my thumb over the ink. I had surrendered nothing. I had fought for 5 years. I had lost my innocence, my sister, and my illusions about my father. But I had chosen peace. I put the card in my pocket. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. I would sell the house. I knew that now. I couldn't live here. It was a house of secrets, and I was done with secrets. I would sell it, pay off the legitimate debts, and take my share. I would buy a place of my own, a place with no ghosts, no hidden liens, no history to weigh me down. I would give Marianne a small portion of the proceeds, not because she deserved it, but because I was not her. I would not leave her destitute. I was Anna Patterson. I was the strong one, and I was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to After My Parents' Funeral. My older sister took the house and kicked me out, but 5 years later. I hope Anna's journey of resilience and truth resonated with you. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest strength. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your country or city. I love seeing our global community grow. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. Did Anna make the right choice in the end? Let me know. Until next time, stay strong and keep watching the signs.